broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
For the past year, or a little over a year, we've been bringing you occasionally some programs that came from a grant from the Association for the Humanities in Idaho. Those programs have been entitled Alcohol and Human Values. In dealing with this very important subject, we have broken into several subtopics, as you know. Both today and next week, we will bring you additional programs from that series, our programs 9 and 10. This will be the conclusion of that particular grant. Tonight, we would like to deal with the question of the woman drinker. In order to accomplish that task, it is my pleasure to welcome to our program as our guest Joyce McHenry, who is a community consultant for the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center in Spokane, Washington. She will deal with this topic, and then again next week with another topic in relation to women and alcohol. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's nice to be invited to be here.
Joining with me today and again next week in interviewing our guest are three members of the panel. First of all is Judith Silty, who is in the Department of English at North Idaho College and has been one of the co-directors and organizers of this grant program for the past year. Welcome once again, Judith.
Thanks, Tony.
Also, James McLeod, who is also co-sponsored and directed the grant from the association. He is also a member of the faculty at North Idaho College in the Department of English. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Tony.
And it's a pleasure to welcome for the first time on our program as a panel member, Judy Edmonds, who is the Educational Director for the Kootenai County Alcohol Awareness Center. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
We'll proceed with the question at once, and the first series will come from Judith Silty.
Yes, Joyce, what are the statistics regarding alcoholism among women today? It seems to me that we certainly hear a lot less about that than we do about alcoholism among men. Is it because it's so less frequent, or what's the situation?
It isn't as visible. We talk a great deal about what we call the lace curtain hidden home drinker, and therefore they're much more difficult to reach, and it's hard for us to get them to come out in the open and accept treatment. However, in the past years, it used to be about one to three, one man to three women would develop an alcohol problem. Now it's the same. So they would come into the statistic of 1 out of every 10 people who drink become alcoholic drinkers, and this would include the woman.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? What sort of factors contribute to it remaining a hidden problem? What do you mean by a lace curtain drinker?
Well, the lace curtain drinker would be your housewife who discovers that a few drinks perhaps makes the housekeeping a little easier, slowly becomes addicted to where she's not comfortable unless she has alcohol in her system. And therefore, she realizes that she's drinking more than she should, but she's able to keep this hidden from her family, from the children, for many years, lots of times. They're not aware of the fact that she is developing a problem, that she is alcoholic. Her behavior is such that the family is very concerned. They don't know why mom acts like she does, but this is the reason. And therefore, as it progresses, alcoholism, as you no doubt know, is a progressive illness. As the illness progresses, then more of the outward manifestations of the illness are noticeable, and then the family would probably take some kind of action.
Jim McLeod.
Joyce, you were just mentioning a minute ago about the fact that this at one time was 1 out of 3, a condition of that sort, and I'm wondering about the figures we get today. Are those figures simply a matter that we are now more aware of the problem and therefore we have greater figures, or is it a situation where in fact alcoholism among women is increasing dramatically in the same sense that it is with youth?
I would say it's a combination of both. More awareness and the fact that women are getting out into the work world. They're facing more stresses, more of the same stresses that the man is facing, and therefore, as a result of this, plus the fact that we have more education, we have more information, there is less and less stigma connected with being an alcoholic, quote, that word that we use so often. And therefore, this is why we are able to get more people into treatment.
You're
more
referring,
women.
of course, to things like Betty Ford's dramatic revelation about this, and Joan Kennedy and people of this kind.
All of these things have helped, very definitely.
Judy?
To go along with this, is there actually an increase in women drinking alcoholically, or is it that basically more women are just coming forward? Could you address that a little more fully?
Well, again, I feel that women are still pretty much hanging back as far as seeking treatment is concerned, but we're, in my opinion, making great strides in bringing it out into the open so that the family members are more involved. They're learning more about what can we do with my wife's drinking problem, and hopefully they are not ashamed of it. And if this is the case, then they will take some steps to motivate.
Thank you.
Judith Sildy.
Yes, I've done a good bit of reading in magazines, actually particularly women's magazines, in the last 2 or 3 years about this whole topic, and there seems to be quite a controversy over the relationship between this increase in problem drinking among women and the whole, what would you call it, the whole sociological trend toward changing role models for women, the feminist movement, and so on and so forth. There are some people who argue that drinking is greater among the so-called liberated woman, the career woman who gets out into the world and is faced with all of the various stresses of the working world. There are those, on the other hand, who say that drinking is greatest and most serious among the more isolated women who remain at home, perhaps frustrated by the job of being just a housewife and so on and so forth. Admittedly, both of those pictures are somewhat stereotyped, but I just wonder what you think about the whole controversy. Is there really some sort of relationship between changing role models for women in general and alcoholism among women?
Well, it would appear, according to the number of women who are coming forth for help, that this has something a great deal to do with it. It is true that your lace curtain housewife I referred to earlier will undoubtedly get into trouble, and perhaps the husband will leave her, or she will be kicked out. They will divorce. This naturally will force her into the job market. If she is able to hold down a job, she has to leave the home to perform all of the daily tasks that he used to be doing, and therefore, again, we come back to the stress situation. So she is pushed out more into the open and can end up in some of these jobs that you're referring to, where, yes, the liberated woman drink with the man, if you will, some of them, and women do, once they have become addicted to alcohol, they will hit the bottom. They'll hit that spiral much quicker. It will become a disease more rapidly than it does with the men, and this is a proven fact also.
James McLeod.
Other than the broad sociological viewpoint, what particular factors put a woman at higher risk of becoming an alcoholic? I read, for instance, that female problem drinking is more of a crisis-related situation. It's precipitated by a specific life change or stress, and I'm curious to know if you can identify some of the factors that are inherent in that.
Well, there would be many factors. I think perhaps a lot of, or it is somewhat of a myth that women reaching a certain age, you know, they will become in the menopause and so forth, but I don't know that that is all that true. We know that there is such a thing as hormonal alcoholism. This is true. There are many reasons why a woman would start to use alcohol. One of them could be because her husband drinks a great deal. Not putting any blame anywhere, but it's like the days of wine and roses. You remember that story a little bit. All right, the wife decides, well, I think I'll join him. Undoubtedly, he is a controlled social drinker who enjoys drinking. She starts to use alcohol as he does. She becomes addicted, and he doesn't. And therefore, this is when she begins to get into trouble. But again, I think the stresses, the responsibilities that women have to face, divorces, separations, for whatever reason, can lead a woman to thinking, well, a few drinks when I get home, the house is empty, I'm lonely, starts to use alcohol, and it isn't very long again before they find they're looking forward more and more to that after-work drink and beginning to drink as an alcoholic drinker and not a controlled social drinker.
Judy Edmonds.
You just referred to the husband having perhaps an influence that precipitates the woman's drinking by being alcoholic or pre-alcoholic himself. Could you give me details about significant other people in the life of a female alcoholic that might contribute to her crossing the line into alcoholic drinking?
The significant other people, and by this Judy is referring to anyone whose life is connected with a drinker. Alcoholism is a family illness. One person drinking directly affects at least 5 people's lives, and indirectly at least 10. So that as the individual continues to drink, the family will do many very predictable things. We have pamphlets which cover this to help the family cope with the problem. One word that we use a great deal besides enabler is gatekeepers. They're the gatekeepers. The husband who is ashamed to admit that he's married to an alcoholic. He'd rather it would be anything else but that. Again, the stigma. The student who hates to admit that his mother has a drinking problem. So these enablers, including the mother of the mother, who will go to any length to cover up the fact that she has a child who is alcoholic and will do everything humanly possible to cover this up. So these are usually the people who will come to a center and seek help first.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The family.
Thank you very much.
For those of you who have joined our program in progress, our guest today is Joyce McHenry, who is a community consultant for the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center in Spokane, Washington. For the past year, we've been dealing with the topic from time to time on alcohol and human values, and today we are discussing the woman drinker. We shall continue the questioning with Judith Sildy.
Thanks. Joyce, what are some of the most damaging effects of problem drinking in women? We've talked about the causes a fair amount. That's a very broad question, I realize.
Yes, it is, but I think I can cover it fairly well for you. Of course, this would need to be on a general basis because alcohol affects everyone this way. The person who has developed the disease of alcoholism will find that their central nervous system is the first part of their body to be attacked by ethyl alcohol. So therefore the person, and this of course would be the woman, becomes very nervous, very, very edgy, very emotional. She may or may not gain a great deal of weight. Other alcoholics most all alcoholics suffer from malnutrition. She will not be getting the right amount of vitamins out of her food, usually finds that she'd rather drink than eat. There's quite often a constant weight loss. We hear a great deal of talk about cirrhosis of the liver, and the more or less the disease aspects of alcoholism you see toward the end, not so much in the beginning. Now, the edginess, the tremors, and the shakes can come about at an early stage, but when you get into your cirrhosis as a rule, or the brain damage, normally they've been drinking for quite a number of years.
What about effects on her family and children? I'm wondering in particular even about fetal alcohol syndrome. This is something that we've heard, I think, a good deal about just in the last couple years in general publications. Could you say a word or two about that?
Yes, I attended a workshop in Seattle a number of years ago. Dr. Ruth Little was the doctor who put it on, and they have done a great deal of research on the fetal alcohol syndrome. To rather simplify it, as the blood alcohol level in the pregnant mother increases, in the alcoholic mother, as the blood alcohol level increases, the percentage of chances that the baby will be born deformed, small head, small eyes, with mental retardation increase. And usually they quote about 50% of the babies are in this condition when they're born. And now they do feel that it's best that a pregnant mother not drink anything. We hear everything from 1 to 2 drinks a day and so forth, but the latest that I have heard is it would be best if they did not drink anything.
Jim McLeod.
Joyce, I've read statistics that indicate that it is usually a man's problem with his job that finally brings him to seek help or treatment for himself. In fact, I believe I've heard it stated that a man will quit drinking 10 years sooner for his employer than he will for his own wife, which is probably one you could react to too. But for many women, this is not the case, I guess. What in your experience is the main reason that alcoholic women seek treatment? What finally brings them to that point?
No alcoholic ever woke up in the morning and looked out and said, it's snowing out and I think this is the day I'm going to get some help for my drinking problem. It just doesn't work that way. Most always, now there are exceptions where a woman or a man will just be sick of themselves and sick of what's happening in their lives, that they don't want to suffer anymore, and they decide, I must get some help for this problem. But the majority of people need to be motivated by somebody. Now, you mentioned industry. We do a great deal of work with industry, hopefully to get the employer to see how much an alcoholic drinker as an employee, and this is the woman as well as the man, is costing their business. That we can put them in treatment. Most health insurance policies will pay up to 80% and some entirely for inpatient treatment. So that more and more people are, for this reason, motivated by the employer who says, how about seeking a new job or help for your problem? The wife might be motivated by the husband who says, I'm sorry, we just can't live this way any longer. The kids and I don't know how to cope with you. Either or. These are the ultimatums that sometimes need to be used. Now, they don't always work. They don't always work. But there needs to be motivation from somewhere before, as a rule, before the alcoholic will say, okay, if that's what you want, I'll give it a try.
Judy Edmonds.
What are some of the factors that make women delay seeking help? I know you talked about gatekeepers and perhaps the stigma. I've also heard that fear of having the children taken away contributes to them not seeking help sooner.
This is the first thing. This is one of the greatest hurdles that we have to get women into treatment. They held a workshop in Seattle called The Embottled Woman in 1978 in Washington and Seattle. and they covered this very well. The fear of losing children was the first thing on the list. The second thing was the child-related problems. We don't want to leave home. What will happen to the kids? The third was the stigma. Again, I just can't let anybody know. The fourth was financial problems, which of course does enter into it. The fifth was fear of losing the job, and the sixth is divorce. And these were the 6 reasons that were listed by the Task Force on Women in the state of Washington at their workshop. And from their surveys, these were the things that would keep women out of treatment.
Are there any facilities that now have child care advantages as far as women being able to go to treatment and have some type of care for their children while they are in treatment?
This is the most important thing, and I'm sorry that I can't say that I can only speak, of course, for the Spokane area. We do have, it was running into a little bit of financial trouble. We did have at SPARC, the Spokane Alcoholic Rehabilitation Center, a daycare program for women with children. And they could come in the morning at, say, 8 o'clock and stay all day, and then they had a daycare person there to take care of their children. This seemed to be working rather well. It was, as I say, I'm not certain for sure that it is still in operation, but it is something to think about, and it is one way that we might be able to get a few women.
Thank you.
Judith Sildy.
Yes, Joyce, one of the things that I have such strong feelings about this whole issue is the matter of the cultural double standard that exists with respect to attitudes toward women drinkers. I've heard it said that women have achieved the equal right to drink, but not the equal right to be drunk, for example, that society looks much more harshly on a woman problem drinker than it would on a man. And as a matter of fact, I read not long ago some statistics that I found rather startling that seem to indicate that same lack of understanding and support from society. For instance, that husbands divorce alcoholic wives much sooner than wives will divorce alcoholic husbands, or that children of alcoholic mothers are much more abusive toward the mother than children of alcoholic fathers. Does your experience bear this sort of thing out?
Yes, I would be inclined very much so to agree with that.
Jim McLeod.
Joyce, how do you evaluate whether, in terms of treatment, how do you evaluate whether a person is alcoholic? Now, of course, we're talking about women here. How would you evaluate her if you were to interview her, since this is, I assume, something that you do on a frequent basis?
Yes, I have done a great deal of it. Probably the best way I can explain it is that a person is alcoholic if drinking is causing a problem in any area of their life over a continuous period of time. If it's causing a job problem, a home problem, a physical problem, a social problem, a school problem, is it causing problems? What causes problems is one. It's that simple. So therefore, if a woman can sit back and look at her drinking pattern and say, I know that when I drink, Joe comes home and we get into an argument, or the kids come home and they accuse me of this and this, the house is dirty and the washing isn't done. These are problems. Somebody has to point out to her, could it possibly be your drinking? Do you think you could get the washing done if you didn't drink? This type of thing. And that's why we always urge families to motivate the person to talk to somebody on neutral ground. Someone who, such as myself or anyone else in the alcoholism field, who wouldn't be, who could be totally neutral and just point out, here's the literature, here are the danger signals of alcoholism, do any of these patterns fit you?
Judy Edmonds.
Do you use the same system of evaluation when you're interviewing male and female alcoholics?
Yes.
Potential?
Yes, I wouldn't say that there would be all that much difference.
And is the same system used to treat male and female alcoholics in treatment centers?
At the present time, most all inpatient treatment programs are coeducational. We do have one halfway house, again up at Spark, for women, but most of their groups, as I understand it, are held in conjunction with the men in the halfway houses. In the coast area, they have a few treatment programs which are totally co-ed, or not co-ed, but totally women. We treat women at the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center at the inpatient program, but it is co-ed. There are men and women both.
Thank you.
Judith?
Yes, Joyce, other than the center at Edgecliff and other than our Kootenai County Council on Alcoholism Awareness Center, what other resources exist in our greater community for women who suspect that they may have a drinking problem of some sort?
All right, I've already mentioned Spark, and the Raleigh Hills Hospital has an aversion treatment program, which is, they're located right across from St. Luke's Hospital. Their program runs about 12 days. It is inpatient again, and is based on the Pavlovian theory. It's one type of treatment for the alcoholic drinker. Then our program and Spark and Alcoholics Anonymous is very active in Spokane and is widely used.
Judith, I believe you have the telephone numbers. Would you like to give those now? Or
I have one of them. I know the Spokane phone number because I've got it handy. That's the Spokane Community Alcoholism Center, I believe 922-2600. The number here in Coeur d'Alene, I think you have, don't you?
I believe that I have one listed on your literature, Alcohol and Human Values, and according to this one, it's 667-9591.
That's the correct one.
I might just interject one quick point too, and that at the Kootenai County Council, the Awareness Center here in Coeur d'Alene, that women outnumber men 3-to-1 in treatment now.
With that, I have to interrupt. We're out of time. The clock has won again. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our program. We believe it's the most important topic. Our guest has been Joyce McHenry, who's a community consultant for the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center in Spokane. She'll be with us again next week at the same time when we'll continue this subject. At that time, we will discuss the women as frustrated bystanders in homes where there's alcohol abuse, particularly from the husband and how it affects her and the children. I think that'll be a very important topic. I would also urge you to be with us again next week because at that time we will be concluding this long year series we've had. I am Tony Stewart. Have a good week.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time. The campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Over the past year, we have brought you 9 programs on a grant entitled Alcohol and Human Values. Today is a special day for us in that we are concluding that project in bringing you the 10th and final program. This week we want to talk about the woman as frustrated bystander, or how women suffer indirectly from alcohol abuse. This grant has been given by the Association for the Humanities in Idaho, and co-sponsored by the Kootenai County Alcohol Awareness Center. In order to finish this grant and this very important topic, we welcome back to our program our guest from last week, Joyce McHenry, who is the community consultant for the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center in Spokane. Joyce, welcome back to our program.
Thank you, Tony. It's nice to be here.
And I wish to invite to the panel two people who have coordinated and co-authored this particular grant. First of all is Judith Silty, who is a member of the faculty at North Idaho College in the Department of English, and Jim McLeod, a faculty member also in the Department of English. You both have worked hard, and we congratulate you, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Don.
Joining with them in questioning our guest today is Judy Edmonds, who is the Educational Director of the Kootenai County Alcohol Awareness Center. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you.
We'll start the questioning today with Judith Silty.
Thank you. Joyce, we talked last week quite a bit about ways that women suffer directly from alcohol abuse if they are drinkers themselves. But what about the other side of the picture, the woman who may even be a teetotaler or at the very least a moderate drinker, and yet who may suffer indirectly from alcohol abuse because the husband or someone else close in the family or otherwise is a drinker? For instance, isn't there a very high correlation between alcoholism and battered wives?
Yes, there certainly is. One person drinking directly affects at least 5 people's lives, and indirectly at least 10. So that when you have your male alcoholic who drinks, perhaps has a blackout, comes home, the wife says something that sets him off, he's very apt to beat her up. Yes, we do have many battered wives. Contrary, however, to the idea, statistics, there aren't as many alcoholics who do abuse their wives as a person would think.
Jim McLeod.
I just want to follow up on that, Joyce, and ask you why. Why is that?
Well, there are other deep-seated problems other than the drinking, as far as the battered wives are concerned. But most everybody jumps to the conclusion that, oh, her husband's an alcoholic, and so therefore he beats her up. But naturally, you cannot determine. Alcoholism is a psychological, physiological, sociocultural illness. Many people feel, I'll go see a psychiatrist, I'll get all of my problems taken care of, then I won't drink as much. We say you need to get the alcohol out of the way. Take the alcohol away, put the person into treatment, or hopefully motivate them to accept some treatment. Maybe in 6 months, after they've been dry with no alcohol for 6 months or a year, it might be discovered that they do have some underlying problems for which they need professional help. Now, this is not always the case, but it does happen very often.
I just want to come back at that one more time, and I have another question I'd like to ask you in addition. It seems to me that I recall seeing television portrayals of situations in which a husband will try to get his wife to stop drinking by beating her. And I guess that's the reverse of the coin. And I wondered if you had had encounters of that sort, where in fact that's the sort of treatment that's used on the wife.
Also, wives use it on the drinking husbands, too. That's quite common.
I guess that's not funny, but I find it.
That's true. I've talked with many women alcoholics who would say, I put the roller skates at the top of the stairway and just hoped and prayed that he'd slip and fall down and kill himself. That's a very serious thing. I think a statistic might help you here. 40%, your alcoholic is 40% sick, and the spouse is 60% sick as a result of a drinking problem. This is why we call it a family illness. Everybody becomes disturbed and sick. They all need some counseling. They all need some help.
What about children? And I'm thinking too now to bring them into this child abuse in particular. Is there some correlation between this and
Yes,
child
there
abuse?
is. We receive quite a few referrals from Child Protective Services, who in turn have gotten the case from the SCAN Board, Suspected Child Abuse and Neglect Board. And therefore, they are investigating. Some of the women who go to the day program I referred to in our last segment come through Child Protective Services, are on the verge of losing their children as a result of some of these problems. Maybe they have been the abusers, the woman, the mother.
Judy?
Besides the battering consequences in an alcoholic family, could you address the issue of like economic consequences to the spouse and perhaps social isolation issues that appear in alcoholic families?
Well, economically, of course, in the families I have dealt with throughout the years, they're always in trouble financially. It costs money to drink. Is this what you're referring
Yes.
to, the financial
Yes.
situation of the family? The father takes the paycheck, drinks it up. There's no money to pay the grocery bills and so forth. This, again, is how the whole family is affected. If the mother works, she'll drink up the money. Can't pay the babysitter, whatever the case might be. So that it's a whole family problem, and lots of finances are involved.
Does the family get basically isolated from friends and relatives as the problem
They
grows
isolate
more complex?
themselves. They isolate themselves in that they don't want to be bothered, stay out of our lives. Their whole life is centered around a bottle. They lead what we call a bottle-centered life. If the alcoholic drinks, the spouse is following every step along the way. She won't be doing anything she should be doing because she doesn't know if her husband will come home drunk, beat up on the kids. She can't go to a meeting. She can't go to a show. There's no social life involved. So therefore, she might as well be drinking right along with him, in that she becomes more affected by his drinking.
Judith Sildy.
Yes, I'm imagining myself in a situation like that. All right, I have a husband, let's say. It could be a child, I suppose, or anyone else. But a husband who's drinking has really gotten out of hand. All kinds of the sort of consequences that we're talking about here going on. And I'm just imagining the sort of feelings I would be having about it. I'm concerned for him. Obviously, I don't want to see him go on injuring himself. At the same time, I'm sure I would be filled with a certain amount of rage toward him and toward what he's doing to me, to children if we have any, so on and so forth. And it seems to me almost more than anything else just an overwhelming sense of impotence to have to just stand there and endlessly watch this whole pattern play itself out over and over and over again. I have to imagine that. I've never been placed in those kind of circumstances myself, but it seems to me that there would be an incredible amount of turmoil going on inside the spouse of someone in a family like that. What sorts of feelings are
they
characteristic, of women in those situations, and how do they cope with them for years on end sometimes?
Well, lots of them don't. They don't cope well at all, and they get sicker and sicker as a result of this. I have used this expression for a number of years. The wife is like a yo-yo on a string. She's pulled up and down, this way, that way. She loves the alcoholic. She hates him. She wishes he'd die. She wishes, hopes sometimes something will happen, that he will die. She feels guilty as a result of these feelings because she gets so terribly desperate. What should she do? She should seek outside help. She could contact one of a center such as you have in Coeur d'Alene. She could contact our center, the Community Alcohol Center. She could go to Al-Anon. The Al-Anon family group is excellent for giving the spouse of the alcoholic support. This would be for her to change her attitudes and her behavior. You know, there's only one person in the world we can change, and that's ourselves. She needs to learn that alcoholism is a progressive illness. It is a disease. That her husband doesn't get drunk every time because he wants to. He gets drunk because he has to once he starts to drink. So therefore, these are all things she needs to learn, and she needs to change her attitudes. He's not just a no-good drunk who's doing this to get even with her. She needs to begin to live her life for herself and her children.
Jim McLeod.
Joyce, I want to follow up on something we were talking about last week in this respect. We were focused in on the woman drinker, and I'm thinking of Al-Anon as usually associated with women as a place that women can go to deal with the problem of the man drinking. But last week, we didn't bring this out, and I think it's a point that should be made, that men can also join Al-Anon. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. They
Yeah.
would be most welcome, and they need the same type of help that the woman needs. All members of the family need help. The young people can go to Alateen as well. Now, at our center, Community Alcohol Center, we have an outpatient significant others group, and it is very active. It meets once a week. This is a group where they would discuss the very things we're talking about here today. And the significant other, quote, can get the support and the knowledge they need to deal with this problem.
Again, I'd like you to say something to the audience about how one decides when a person needs help with alcohol. Under the circumstances that you described, they seem to be rather severe, but how would a wife know under conditions where her husband does drink heavily, and not all heavy drinkers are necessarily alcoholic?
No.
How would she be able to tell that they are in trouble and that they need to get some help?
A person is alcoholic if drinking is causing a problem in any area of their life, and their home life is one of the areas, or their job, their physical well-being, or maybe out in society. Maybe when he stops after work to have a drink, he gets in a fight in the bar every time, goes through a personality change. Comes home, he's a nice fellow when he's sober, but when he's had something to drink, becomes very abusive and so forth. So it isn't very difficult for the non-drinking member to come to this decision that I had better talk to somebody who knows more about this than I do, and they should seek some professional help to see if there's anything they can do.
If any of our viewers have joined our program in progress, our guest today is Joyce McHenry, who is the community consultant for the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center in Spokane. We're bringing you this program on alcohol and human values, and our subtopic is The Women as Frustrated Bystanders by a grant from the Association for the Humanities in Idaho. We shall continue the questioning with Judy Edmonds.
Basically, women in our society are the nurturers. They love, protect, help. I find that this goes along with enabling the drinking and alcoholics to continue. Could you address some of though women are well-intentioned to protect their alcoholic husbands, how this interferes with him facing the problem and getting help?
Yes, one of the ways this can happen, we also call these women the gatekeepers. One thing they do is to slowly assume the responsibilities of the alcoholic. They take over all of the disciplining of the children. They don't trust the alcoholic to do this. They will adjust their schedule and their life. If the person is late getting home for dinner, that's perfectly all right. I'll fix your dinner even if it's 10 o'clock at night. She goes to the kitchen, and everything revolves around this individual. If finances, as you mentioned earlier, are involved, she may take a part-time job so that she can reinforce the family bank account. By so doing, all these people are doing is keeping the alcoholic sick. They're closing their own eyes, they're pulling down the shade that there is a problem which needs to be faced by the entire family. And until somebody gets off this merry-go-round, as we call it, until they get off the merry-go-round and don't continue to play the games the alcoholic plays, it will never change.
As a specific example, if the alcoholic gets a drunk driving ticket, what would be something the wife could do to?
Well, if he lands in jail and has to serve a day in jail, which they do now, it's mandatory in this state. They will serve 1 day in jail, regardless of if it's first offense or not.
Are you speaking of the state of Washington? Or
In
Idaho.
the state of Washington, I'm sorry, in the state of Washington, this is true. And let's assume it's an assault charge instead of a drunk driving charge. And he calls up and says, I beat up on somebody and I'm in jail, come down and bail me out. This would not be probably the right thing to do.
So tough love is in order there.
That's correct.
Judith Silty.
I'm just thinking about some of the other ramifications about that. What about when the boss calls to know why the husband hasn't showed up for work for 2 or 3 days?
We have a very fine film on that. It's called Time for Decision. And the wife does this very thing. Basically, it's a cover-up by the whole family. And therefore, they will make excuses. They will lie to the boss. Lots of times because they're afraid of the consequences.
Sure.
Very
It may mean
true.
loss of the job.
Very true. But again, we were discussing before we came on the air that we wanted to talk about intervention. What should the family do? What are the steps they should take? One step they can take is to contact an information referral center or the community alcohol center, come in and talk to a counselor who perhaps would be willing to work with them when they're ready to discuss the problems the whole family is having. Now, intervention has to be done right. It should be done when all members of the family, perhaps including the boss, are fed up. They're ready to do something. And there are certain things and steps to take, which I won't go into now, but it can be done and it should be done.
In other words, you're saying it's something that most likely the spouse couldn't handle very well on her own. Right?
Correct.
What about the old strategy of just saying, if you really love me and the children, you'll stop drinking or else? Doesn't
Well,
work very well.
Many of them say that. When the alcoholic sobers up, he promises, I won't do this again. I do love you and the children. And he means that when he says it. But again, once they start to drink, they can't stop. So the spouse has to understand what they're up against, that it is a disease, and how to deal with it as if it were diabetes, tuberculosis, or any other illness.
So threats don't work, and cover-ups, no matter how well-intentioned, only perpetuate the problem. Is what you're saying.
Correct.
Jim McLeod.
Joyce, could you give us a description of what you think of would be a typical alcoholic family? I'm thinking of it sort of in the abstract, but I'd like perhaps maybe an example from your own experience of what an alcoholic family would look like in terms of what sorts of things go on in that family.
Well, just about everything that we've talked
goes
of
on.
here on this program. Probably the son or the husband in the family had an alcoholic father. There's 50% chance there is a genetic inheritance. Maybe the gal he married, her mother had an alcohol problem, and therefore when he starts to drink, they begin to get into all kinds of reactions because of her past experience. This teenager becomes a high school dropout because 50% of high school dropouts come from drinking families. And I don't know that I've answered that really the way you'd like it answered, but it's a bit difficult.
No, I think that the idea that the parents have a definite bearing in this is to, I understand now that alcoholism, there is a genetic component that they, at least that's the current theory, I guess. I find that rather interesting that generally that their alcoholic children come from alcoholic families, and they carry that on, either in terms of the environment or the genetics that
This
is
is true.
transmitted
The
in that
emotional
manner.
characteristics also are there. However, you'll find many alcoholics who did not have alcoholic parents, too.
Judith Silty.
Yeah, talking about the alcoholic family reminds me of something you said earlier. That is that it is a family illness, and I'm not sure I recall exactly what you said, but that the drinker himself or herself is 40% sick, and that the spouse is 60% sick. Isn't this just sort of a fancy way of saying, well, I'm drinking because of you? I mean, 60% of the difficulty is yours, and you're the one who's making me drink.
Maybe that's a way of saying that we can't always totally, that's why we call it a family illness. You can't always totally blame the alcoholic drinker.
There's a lot of that, isn't there? This mutual, I've got you, and it's your fault.
Right.
And
Right. It's a very complicated situation, which does need, in most cases, some professional help to iron out.
so the concept of the innocent victim is largely a myth, the passive person with no influence on the situation.
By the innocent victim, I don't quite understand what you're...
Well, so often there's my husband goes out, he gets drunk, he does it, not
Oh,
I do.
yes, right. We have many martyred, we call them the martyred wives or husbands, who many times would not, if they divorced, they would turn right around to marry another alcoholic. Because there's something that satisfies something within their own nature to take care of, nurse, look after, boss around a sick alcoholic.
Judy Edmonds.
This is perhaps going back to the intervention idea. Is it a myth that the alcoholic has to hit bottom before treatment can be
Yes.
effective?
Definitely a myth. Too many people feel, I'll help him when he asks for help. But you take a mind that's all fuzzed up with ethyl alcohol, who is dependent on a drug, and expect them to make the decision about their life. It just cannot be done. So therefore, I've always said alcoholism is like an elevator. They can get off at any floor. And through public education, various types of centers and so forth, we're raising this bottom so that the alcoholic can get off sooner. They don't have to ride it to the bottom.
Thank you.
Judith Sildy.
How does this concept of intervention differ from the old message, shape up or ship out?
Well, not a great deal. Basically, this is the point they finally get around to, but there are lots of wives or husbands who don't want a separation. They want to make this work, and they've tried everything they can think of, but it's all been wrong. Your alcoholic knows they drink too much, they know they have a problem, and they are in reality asking for help. Please hear what I'm not saying. So that the intervention many times is a welcome relief. Somebody will make a decision that might motivate them into treatment.
Jim McLeod.
Joyce, I think you've already, to some extent, touched on a number of resources in our area for intervention, but I'd like you to underscore those again, if you would.
All right. Shall I start with the Spokane? Speak about the ones I'm most familiar with in the Spokane area. The Edgecliff Alcoholism Center is, we have the Detox Dry Out Center, which is used mainly for the Skid Row type drinker. We have a 28-day inpatient program, which is a live-in co-ed situation. They receive psychological counseling. They work through the first 5 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, individual therapy and group therapy. Then we have a 5-day phase 2 program, which is rather new and is working very well, could be used by the professional woman we spoke of in the last segment, or the professional man who perhaps can't take 28 days off from work for treatment, but a 5-day program perhaps would set them maybe on the right path. We have an extended care facility called EWAC, and then the Community Alcohol Center, which is an outpatient treatment program. We do group counseling, individual counseling, information and referral. A person can be evaluated and referred perhaps to the Raleigh Hills program, which is an aversion therapy, or to Spark or Halfway House or wherever we feel is the place for them.
I think it would be appropriate at this time to get the address of where the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center is located in Spokane. What is the address?
South 511 Park Road,
And you have the telephone number?
922-2600.
Repeat that again, please.
922-2600.
Okay, thank you. You might also point out that there are other centers that deal with this problem, and we don't have time to discuss all of those, but they could contact you and you could give them information if they live in our area that we covers several states, so they could contact you.
Correct.
Fine. We have time for one short question, Judy.
I was just wondering if any of the facilities you mentioned or any others have family education programs due to the nature of the 60% family illness.
Our significant others group would come as close to it as anything that I know of in the Spokane area. We would like to see a total family group, and that is something that I'm sure will be forthcoming in the future.
With that, I must interrupt. We're out of time. Joyce, thank you very much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Joyce McHenry, who's a community consultant for the Edgecliff Alcoholism Center. With this program, we bring to a conclusion a 13-month program on alcohol and human values. We have discussed alcoholism in industry, in education, among youth, women, and so forth. I want to take this opportunity, while I have the time, to thank both Judith Sildy and Jim McLeod, who have worked for over 3 years on this program. It took 2 years to create the program and get the grant, and it has been 13 months in implementation. You've done an outstanding job, and you've brought much to North Idaho and to Washington and Montana with this program. You may not be aware of the fact that in this program they've had public meetings in which people have attended quite well, and they've discussed this in the form of a panel, and then we brought you these TV programs. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Be with us again next week when again we'll be discussing what we believe to be a significant issue at this time. Until then, have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.